All right, everybody. So welcome to the latest from the field Enlist call. You have your Southeast Minnesota Pioneer team with us on June 14th. So, all right. So what we're going to be reviewing today is, and the guests that are accompanying me here is Josh Hoffner, agronomist in the Southeast Minnesota area, along with Allie Wise, also field agronomist, and then myself, Emily Carlin, the territory manager for the Pioneer team. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk through when our application window is appropriate for Enlist spraying. We're going to talk about the performance of Enlist and the success that we saw last year with different mix partners. Then we're going to talk through how actual take mixes should be prepared, and then we'll go into best practices after that. But to kind of lay out the land for the 2022 season here, we do need to kind of recap where the maize season and the planting season took us this year. So I remember on May 2nd, we were sitting there going, geez, I don't know if we're ever going to get this crop planted. And then bam, right away, starting the end of that week, we started probably the largest planting push that we had throughout the entirety of the planting season. For all of our PK plots that we put in for corn, I think our average was May 10th. And then shortly after that, we had our average for all of our bean planting plots. So we had that heat wave in there that helped get a lot of this crop in the ground. After that, though, we had a lot of events that really put a rough start to the beans, I would say, more than anything. Right away, May 19th and 20th, we had washing, hail, crusting issues from 3 to 5 inches across the entire territory. And then right after that, we started with some cold, right? We froze one night, which caused some more replant issues. Anything that was coming up from that May 19th and 20th started to have some issues on it. And then we went into Memorial Day weekend where we finally got some heat back, but it also came with a lot of wind, which caused a ton of sandblasting, especially on the western side of the territory. And that then kicked off the season of soybean scouting Mageddon, because I think everybody has done way more stand counts this year for soybeans than we've ever done before. Many issues with that, but all things considered, now in the middle of June, things are looking really, really good. The corn's advanced and beans are finally coming out of that initial kind of stage of gloom. And I think that we've definitely established a good stand out there now after a few interceding opportunities and getting things cleaned up out there. So with that, I am going to kick this over to Allie Wise, and she's going to talk about our first topic with Enlist.
Thanks, Emily. So yeah, I think there's a few key pieces around the Enlist system that are good to review before we hit this application window here. And I think we'll start with what that application window is. So there are no calendar cutoff dates for application of Enlist, but there is an appropriate growth stage window in which we can make applications. And for Enlist, E3 soybeans, that window is going to be through the R1 growth stage or up to R2. Originally, this is a change. Originally, the label was through R2. Full flowering, but this was a change that came with the new 7-year registration that we were able to work through this year. So the R1 growth stage, if you look on the visual we have on the screen there, you can see it's being highlighted. The R1 growth stage is when one flower is open anywhere at any node on the plant, and just the beginning of the flower process. As we progress to the R2 growth stage, we will then find an open flower at one of the top 2 nodes of the soybean plant. So you can see visually, that does show us we have a decent window as we work through that R1 growth stage up to R2. So nice to see that we have a lot of time to make a proper application of Enlist. But I think it's nice to look at, when might we hit that window this year, the beginning of R1 through R1 up to R2. And if we look at estimated soybean developmental stages and when we might hit that this year, here we're looking at estimates of specific crop development stages, and this is from both measured data and estimated crop development. So this is really great information here, but I think we'll use this as an estimate, a projection, and not necessarily the hard facts, just because there's some other factors that can come into play here. So what we're looking here, we have 2 different planting dates, a May 5th planting date and then a 1st of June planting date. Maybe you had some replant, maybe you weren't able to get in the field as quick as you would like. And then within each planting date, you can see we're looking at 3 different maturities. So a 1.5, a group 2, and then a 2.5 being here. So if we start with the May 15th planting date, say you planted a group 2 soybean, you're looking at having a window to apply Enlist through R1, which is going to be up to the 13th of July. If we move to a later planting date, so the 1st of June, a group 2, you're going to likely have that window through at least the 20th of July. And so I think, really important here, one of the big reasons we like working with Enlist is the flexibility in application timings. And you think of, we had some later planting scenarios, or maybe you have the need to control a weed like water hemp that's going to emerge basically until we freeze in the fall. It's important to have the ability to spray later if we need to. So just nice to have that opportunity to do so where needed. Sticking with the flexibility, we talked about the flexibility of the application window. There's some really nice applicator flexibility that comes along with Enlist. So if we just kind of work through some common questions we get, is Enlist a federal restricted use pesticide? No, it is not. Can it only be applied by persons with a certified applicator license? No, it can be applied by those under a certified applicator supervision. So this is important because we do have some products out in the marketplace that are registered as federally restricted use pesticides. And what this means is that they can only be applied by those with a certified applicator license. So there's it's a really nice change here just in terms of applicator flexibility because Enlist is not a federally restricted use pesticide. Another common question, is there a time of day application limitation? No, there is no time of day application limits with Enlist. In terms of nozzles, we get a lot of questions on nozzles. Could I use an AIXR or an AITTJ nozzle? Are those qualified for use? Yes, those and many other qualified options are available. If you go to enlist.com/nozzles, you can see the complete list there. But really important to optimize coverage, we want to make sure that we're using less coarse nozzles and make sure we're corresponding that with higher operating spray pressures to get the coverage that we would want there. All right, so moving on, I think tank mix flexibility is another huge benefit that the Enlist system brings to us. It really allows us to customize different tank mix options, as well as the ratio of herbicides within that tank mix based on maybe the weed pressure that you have for a specific field. So do we have the ability to tank mix with qualified glufosinate or Liberty? This is a really nice piece here because yes, we do. So Enlist 1 can be safely combined with glufosinate, Liberty herbicide to control maybe a scenario where you have glyphosate resistant weeds or just other needs to have the strength of a program that is using multiple sites of action all together. Do we have the ability to tank mix with qualified AMS? Yes, you can use between usually 1.5 to 3 pounds per acre of AMS. This could be any combination of qualified dry AMS, liquid, or AMS containing products. And you can also find that on the enlisttankmix.com site. Could we use a tank mix with Durango DMA herbicide? This is a really nice one here. We do have the ability to use Durango. This is going to be an amine form of glyphosate versus maybe some K-salt formulations that you can see out there. So that's going to be a nice qualified tank mix option there as well. We get the question sometimes, is there a Enlist glyphosate blend product available? We do have that option as well. Enlist Duo would be our 2,4-D choline and glyphosate premix. As such, though, that does mean it comes with a smaller list of legal tank mix options that are available. So we do like maybe the little bit more of tank mix flexibility that comes with Enlist 1. So you're probably going to more predominantly see that as the option that you're going with out in the field.
All right, I'll take over here next, Sally. All good info there. So I'm just going to go through a kind of a virtual walking tour here of one of our Enlist executive sites. This one was up in Zumbrota, Minnesota. We did have a great site down in Harmony. A lot of our sales agencies and customers got through that site last summer. The only thing that was kind of frustrating about the Harmony site, we've been all talking about Top Gun 1 and 2. The weed spectrum in Harmony was more like the Top Gun 1 era, where the weed spectrum in Zumbrota was more like the Top Gun 2 era. So that would be my comparison of the two. As you can see in the first picture here, this was our control. There is a sign in there that actually says that it was a control. In this treatment, all we had there was basically just 4 ounces of sonic down pre. So as you can see, as these pictures were taken in August, pre only on bare ground, the water hemp pressure was just overwhelming at this site, which is kind of why we put it there. As you can see, very heavy pressure at this site, and we'll kind of go through some of the treatments through the next slide sequences here. So just looking at our first tank mix here. So in this case, again, we had that sonic down. We came back when the weeds were 3 to 6 inches, all these treatments were. And in this case, we came back with just glyphosate at a quart per acre, tank mix with Ever Pre-X, which is a group 15, like a dual product at a pint per acre, and then just our AMS at a 2.5% volume to volume. As you can see there, no surprise, we have some glyphosate resistance water hemps there. Ones that we weren't able to control. Pretty heavy pressure there. Again, not saying that we didn't get a few. So, in this case, is every single water hemp plant glyphosate resistant? Maybe not, but a majority of them are and probably soon will be. But again, would not be a situation that we'd have desirable weed control in just a glyphosate only situation. So moving on to our second treatment here. So in this case, we got the glyphosate again in a quart. Now we've added the Enlist 1 at 2 pints per acre. We also have the Ever Pre-X at a pint per acre with AMS again. In most cases, this will probably be a tank mix that covers a huge percentage of the acres as we get to spraying Enlist here. As you can see, now we don't have the escapes. We got, extremely good control. Maybe one on the edge there that maybe only caught half the boom there, might have snuck through. But I would say overall, looking at this, this was sprayed at 3 to 6 inch weeds. This picture's taken in August. We got a great kill, but this also highlights the power of having a layered residual here, especially on bare ground where we don't have a canopy to help us out here. The Ever Pre-X doing a really good job keeping the late flush of water hemp down, and that's also one of the big challenges of water hemp. It continues to germinate throughout the growing season, basically until it freezes. So having that layered residual there helped us do a good job. So here, Enlist 1, great job on the emerge water hemp. Ever Pre-X helping on the residual side of things. We got a really clean situation. Moving on to our third treatment here, Allie mentioned that we can utilize Liberty on Enlist soybeans. And in this case, we went out there actually with just Liberty, so we didn't use Enlist 1 on the tank mix. So here we had the Liberty at a quart per acre, Ever Pre-X at a pint with the AMS. And again, we did kill a lot of weeds, but if you do start looking at the picture there, we got a couple big ones we missed there. You even see a couple small ones that we might have burned off, but they didn't get all the growing points killed, and they kind of came back there. So again, did a good job, but is this going to be probably a desirable treatment in the producer's eye at the end of the year? Probably not going to like having a few escapes up there. But again, it also is a great visual. The Ever Pre-X doing a good job on the layered residual as well. So kind of moving on to our last treatment here, Allie mentioned earlier that we can tank mix Enlist 1 with Liberty. So in this case, we took the Enlist 1 at 2 pints, added the Liberty at a quart. So in this case, no glyphosate in the mix, left the Ever Pre-X with the AMS, extremely important with the Liberty there. In here, we had tremendous control. We did not spray for volunteer corn. So this was one area that we had a few volunteer corn plants, but if you look and you walk that entire treatment, there was nothing there but dirt and a few volunteer corn plants. And when we look at this comparison, you might be saying, when would I maybe utilize Liberty versus glyphosate in that tank mix? I think in most cases, if we're on time, 2, 3, 4 inch weeds, we're going to use the glyphosate Enlist tank mix. In some situations where if we have heavy pressure and maybe we get, forced out of the field from, rain in our way, and maybe the pressure gets a little overwhelming, or we miss a pre, this is probably going to be the premier tank mix to really kill some tough pressure situations, or maybe some water hemp that get a little bigger than we'd like them to be, which hopefully that never happens. But it is a great combination, and in time, probably a combination we'll continue to see more and more use of across the area as we get in the Enlist system at a higher percentage of the acres. So one more click there, Emily, too. So just looking at, the program approach, I kind of really belabored the value of that layered residual of using a group 15, and in the sequence of the pictures, we used Ever Pre-X, which is a metolachlor or dual product. There are other ones, kind of listed. I got Ever Pre-X, metolachlor, Zidua, Warrant, all products that could be used, in that same tank mix to help that. And really what we just see greater control, right? Where we're using that layered residual, we're getting approximately 20% better full season control. And really that's just coming from buying ourselves that residual, giving ourselves just catching some of those late emerging, germinating weeds and not letting them ever emerge and be a problem in our field. But the other thing I think that's really important about using this late residual with this first pass is if you want to avoid having to make a third trip, this is probably your best insurance policy, right? Spray the glyphosate, spray the Enlist, add the group 15, and that's going to be your best chance. If you had a good pre-down coming back with this, your risk of maybe having to come back a third time goes much down. And we really just like to avoid that, right? Not having to spray Enlist more than once and trying just to protect the long-term efficacy of that product. But keeping the weeds under control start to finish is just a great way to keep those fields clean and also extend the life of all of our technology and products that we have on the marketplace. One other thing there on the right, when you do use EverPreX or a group 15, in some cases, just watch your adjuvant rate. Not so we still want to probably be using some NIS or oils or crop oil fat. But, as we introduce a group 15, we're bringing some oils and surfactant with that in some cases, maybe bringing down your full oil load. It might not be a bad idea just to reduce a little bit of the speckling that we might see from the surfactant load. And then on the volunteer corn side of thing, I did mention that just briefly that we didn't spray for that. One thing is we, whether it be in the Enlist system or as we were using other growth regulator systems in the soybean, one thing we found is that as we utilize these products with products like Select Max or the Fuselates, that we do need to increase the rate due to some antagonism that we have with the Enlist products. So in most cases, what we're going to say, if you were having success, for example, at 6 ounces of Select Max in the past when you weren't using Enlist or a growth regulator, we're going to say in most cases you want to increase whatever rate you're having success with by a third. Okay. The chart on the bottom there that Emily's highlighting kind of gives you some guidelines of what we'd recommend if you're using Select Max. So if we got some 12-inch corn, we're going to recommend at least 8 fluid ounces at a minimum. If we get to 24-inch corn, up to 12 ounces. As we get to 36-inch corn, we're going to be up to a pint. So that's a great chart guideline of what we're going to want to use. And also, if we're using those products, we've got to have NIS or oil in those products, which in most cases we'll be using them regardless. But if you are adding that, make sure we got the rate increased and make sure we got the right surfactant to make sure we get the control. Because as we've launched these, like Enlist soybeans, one of the biggest things has been my volunteer corn is getting harder to kill. In most cases, it's just strictly because we're not using enough product to overcome the antagonism and/or we're not using the right surfactant load with it. And that's what's causing some of our challenges. And then last but not least, as you're getting ready to spray this, tank mix procedure, extremely important if you're applying your own. So again, when we are spraying a list, we always want to get the spray tank up to about that 50% fill rate, so half full. And then again, begin agitation. And when we say agitation, you maybe don't need to be full blown agitation, but just make sure we're agitating as we're going in there. But in some cases, if we're over agitating, we can maybe have a little bit of challenges of the mixing there. And as we look at the order of it, again, just like always before, we always want to condition the water first. So if we're using dry AMS or any water conditioning agents, we want to put that in the tank first. Then onto our pre-slurry water soluble packets, onto our whatever powders, any compatibility agents with Enlist. I don't think we'll probably be using much of that. Our liquid flowables, our capsule suspension products, and then again, our emulsifiable concentrations, which would be like our EverPreX or our Select Max in that case. Then onto our glyphosates, glufosinate, Enlist along the way. Then our surfactant load number 9, and then top off with water. And I think the other important thing here, as we're loading this, if you're using an inductor, make sure we're adding them one by one in this order. Don't be, if it says in this order, well, don't just dump, your Select Max in first and then that right at the top before it's all flushed through. Try to be adding those one by one. And if you follow this order, your chances of having any issues with the mixing process or performance, you're not going to have any challenges. That's a great reference guide. Maybe something we'll print out and give that out on some laminated cards too as we make the rounds. But it is important to make sure we're mixing right, to make sure you don't have a challenge, and to make sure that our herbicides are working as effectively as possible.
Thanks, Josh. So I think let's hit on spray volumes here. This is a really important one. We really want to make sure that we're using proper spray volumes. It's important to note that the Enlist label does have ranges of which you can operate within, if you're spraying Enlist, or maybe you're in spraying Enlist 1 with Liberty. But we recommend using spray volumes at the higher end of the recommended range. We've seen this to really improve the consistency of weed control. And so our recommendations, just based on past experience with the products, would be, if you're spraying Enlist Duo or Enlist 1, we want to make sure we're at that 15 gallons per acre. And if you're using Enlist 1 plus Liberty, you want to be at that 20 gallons per acre. So, more water in the tank is better. For example, if we're pushing those rates closer to 20 gallons per acre versus 15, it's going to provide better coverage. It's going to give us better control of applications. And we understand that using 15 gallons per acre does help you cover, more acres on a fill. We really need to consider the quality of our work in the long run. And it's really important in the big scheme of things. And, Josh, Emily, and I were talking, if you do the math on how many more loads of water you're going to need to use by maybe, let's say you've been running 12 gallons up to 15 gallons per acre, it's really not going to be that many more loads you're going to need to carry, especially depending on the capacity, the volume of water that you're carrying per load. So really important here, keep those water rates up, and you're going to be really thrilled with the control that the products are going to give you. Oh, Emily, could you go back 1 second? I also want to point out, because I'm sure someone can see this, that is a cotton field that you're observing on the right-hand side of the screen. So I just didn't want you to think that your agronomist in Southeast Minnesota did not know the difference between soybean and cotton, but that's a great picture of the weed that you're going to get if you're keeping your spray volumes at appropriate levels. Protecting sensitive areas. So when we're talking about sensitive areas, we're talking about a 30-foot buffer downwind between application areas and sensitive areas. And so sensitive areas, they come out of the EPA Endangered Species Act. What this means for Enlist is that there is a sensitive area downwind. If there is a sensitive area downwind, you need a 30-foot buffer, so that'd be 12 30-inch rows. Examples of sensitive areas are going to be CRP, wetlands, woods, really any area that could have an endangered species. If you go to the next slide though, Emily, it's good to point out that the following areas would not be sensitive areas. So you can see roads fall under this, planted agricultural fields, except those crops mentioned in the susceptible plants section. And this is a really important one here. So soybeans are not a susceptible plant. So this is a really big convenience factor for us. So say you're spraying your Enlist E3 soybean field with Enlist 1, and the wind is blowing towards a neighboring non-Enlist soybean field, you can legally spray that field because soybeans are not considered a susceptible plant. Agricultural fields that have maybe been prepared for planting would not be a sensitive area, and then areas covered by the footprint of a building or really any structure that would have walls or a roof.
All right. Well, yes. Thank you, Allie and Josh, for going over those awesome points about Enlist and the system and just getting us prepared for soybean spraying season, because we know that we have quite a few Enlist fields out there, and this is going to be just a great opportunity, especially going into the next couple of weeks to use a system that in past years, I don't know if we've had this flexibility and this freedom to be able to use a system like this. I think we do need to be cognizant of the heat that is coming. Watch the gallons per acre, get that as high as we possibly can that you guys feel comfortable with, because coverage is the most important thing, like Josh and Allie both mentioned here, and especially with the heat, getting more water in the tank is going to help with everything just work better, right? So I think that is my final point, is that we do have the freedom to spray with Enlist, right? This is a very, very nice system, and being able to use it for all of the reasons on the screen right now is the reason why we've gone this direction, because we're going to have the best weed control out there with the best products and the best opportunity to mix it with the products that you want to control the weeds and getting more modes of action out there. So with that, we're going to turn it over to questions here, if there are any.
I have a question / comment for Josh. So in a high humidity and temperature situation, like we're likely are experiencing this week. What are some things that we probably need to make sure we're keeping an eye on, and just not some cosmetic things that aren't anything for concern?
Yeah, I think one thing we'll want to keep an eye on, and especially if you're applying your own, the Enlist trait, it is a metabolic trait. So when you do spray Enlist 1 on it, it does have to metabolize the 2,4-D choline that's in there. So it's not uncommon to see the plant droop, and that droopness will, if it's really hot and things are happening fast, it's going to be a more severe droop than if it's cool. However, if it's warmer, the droop will probably last less long. But in some cases, say you're spraying a load, you get done, since there's not a time of day, limitation, you get done 11, you go in for lunch, you come back to start, you might see where you left off, the plant's already drooping. Don't worry, they're not going to die. It's just they got to metabolize that 2,4-D and they'll pop right back up. The other thing with the high heat and a lot of sun, I know we talked a lot about using oils and surfactants. We can get speckling burn from that. So I would anticipate, if we're running some aggressive surfactant loads or running some group 15 with it, we're going to see some speckling of the leaves from those being in the tank as well, especially with the amount of heat we're going to have here the next 10, 12 days.
Perfect. Okay, with that, I don't see any other questions popping up. So great points, guys. Thank you so much for your time today. And please reach out to any of us with any questions about the Enlist system and Pioneer in general. Thanks, guys.